I want to start off and say this. I don't like any of the political parties we currently have. I don't like the Republican parties. I don't like the Democrat Party. I used to be a libertarian, and before that, I used to be a Republican. I did vote for Trump, and there are times when I've probably voted more Republican than Democrat, but I am firmly against two party control, a duopoly, two party puppet show, whatever you want to call it. I would very much like for there to be more parties that end up getting in the power of governments, state, local, and federal. That way, the duopoly would break and they would be forced to compromise and work together, knowing that none of them have a full majority. So it would be nice if we did have a legitimate third party. But unfortunately, we do not have a legitimate third party. We have two parties, which is the way it's been for too long now. And as of right now, it feels like one of those parties is doing very badly against the other, and for right reasons. There are mistakes that the Democrats have made that they're now paying for, and there are things that the Republicans have done that they're going to eventually pay for as well. It's an ugly cycle. One becomes the heel, one becomes the hero, and then they switch the hats. One wears the black hat, and then the other wears the white hat. And then somewhere down the road, they'll swap hats. It's just the way this cycle continues, and it's very, very tiresome. Meanwhile, the country continues to be divided further and further apart. So there's some things I've mentioned in past videos that I agree with what Trump has done. There's a growing number of things I disagree with. But I just want to talk about, I guess, the Democrat Party right now because y'all are not doing too well. No, you're not. And I'm trying to be fair here because there's some things as a moderate that I agree with when it comes to Democrat policy. Now, there's some things when it comes to the Republicans that I also agree with. I find myself in the middle. And I feel like a lot of people are in the middle. I think the moderate population last polled was like in the 30s, like 34% moderates. You think with that number, we would be able to like form our own political party. But the problem is you have different types of moderates. You have those that are willing to work with, right-leaning, left-leaning moderates. But then there are right-leaning moderates that don't want to work with left-leaning moderates and vice versa. But I do think that the best third option in the future is going to have to be a moderate party, or one of these political parties is going to have to cater to or start leaning more moderate, which is why we're going to talk about the Democrats. So I have some things linked below in the description section. We're not going to go over a lot of other things before we get to my notes about what I think the Democrats need to do. So CNN poll from CNN and other sites are covering this as well. Democrat Party's favorability drops to a record low. I'm not going to read over the entire article. If you want to go do that yourself, feel free. So as of right now, the Democrats' approval rating is at 29%. According to CNN, that is a record low dating all the way back to 1992. So the Democrats, polling-wise, are doing bad, extremely bad. And, of course, there are a lot of Democrats out there saying, hey, we need to do damage control. We need to rethink some things. We need to restart, reboot, maybe tweak the platform. And Bernie Sanders is out there as well, he's Democrat, but he's also independent. He's also a socialist. But for the most part, I do like Bernie. I mean, there's things I disagree with him on, but as a moderate, there are definitely policies he has that I agree with. So this is basically what Bernie Sanders said on X. The Democrat Party needs a major transformation. It can no longer be top-down, billionaire-funded, consultant-driven party. It must be multi-generational, multiracial, working-class party. In a time of growing oligarchy and authoritarianism, that's the only path to victory. Now, there's some things in that statement that I agree with. There's some I disagree with. Billionaire funded. Okay, so George Soros and other billionaires for the longest time has had influence on the direction that the Democrat Party has gone. And I find it hypocritical to criticize Musk for doing basically what Soros has been doing for a very long time now. So yeah, I think that we can't ignore that reality, that a lot of policies that the Democrats have been pushing are because of Soros and others like Soros that are billionaires that are behind the scenes using their money or the government's money, apparently, according to Doge, in order to carry out their policies. Now, not everything was bad, but there's definitely a lot of bad stuff that a lot of Americans disagree with. But the problem is we have authoritarianism on both sides. And we need to step back from that because this is supposed to be a democratic republic of by and for the people. We're supposed to have the right to vote, and for our representatives in Congress, our senators, not just at the federal level, but at state level, local level, they're supposed to represent us. And there's some silliness going on in Texas, like apparently unanimous vote by the state Senate regarding banning anime out of fear of pedophiles, when the mass majority of people that enjoy anime are not pedos. I would say 99% of anime enjoyers, whether it's like TV shows or manga or video games, they're not pedos. So why are you demonizing 99% of people? That seems to be very out of touch, in my opinion, when it comes to some of the things Republicans are doing right now. And I think eventually it's going to bite them in the ass. So here's some of the things I think that the Democrat Party needs to do. Now, you have to understand why the Republicans won under Trump and MAGA in 2024. And it's a lesson they didn't learn in 2016. Americans want their country and needs to come first before the needs of the rest of the world. Now, I believe in a balance where we do want to be involved with other countries and have a place, a part in the global community. But every nation should obviously focus on their needs of the country, of the people, first and foremost. America is no exception. And for the longest time now, it's felt like the Democrats didn't care as much about the plight of the American people, especially the homeless population, the unemployment, people struggling to get by paycheck to paycheck, barely keeping a roof over their heads. They're more concerned about helping people in other countries. And a lot of these countries don't even like us. So that's another reason why the Americans, voted for Trump over Kamala. Plus, I don't care what people are saying about Kamala right now in hindsight. She was still a bad choice. Biden was a bad choice. And that's another issue. You gave us bad options against Trump. First, it was Biden, somebody that a lot of us have been suspicious about for the longest time, suffering from cognitive issues, mental decline. And now you have this whole auto pen pardon fiasco that's come out. I guess back in December, the alleged pardons that he signed weren't actually signed by him because he wasn't even at the White House when those pardons were signed. They were done allegedly by auto pen, which is probably going to cause some sort of constitutional Supreme Court issue because Trump's trying to void those pardons, which is very, very unprecedented. And that's something a president should never do. They should never auto pen. Like, at least with Trump, when it comes to his executive orders, you actually have him signing the executive orders himself. And that should be the way it is for every single president, for every single thing they sign, every document, whether it's an executive order or whether they're signing a bill into law that's been voted by Congress. And that's the best thing that can happen. I'd rather have that than executive orders, and especially pardons. The president should actually be the one sitting there behind the desk of the Oval Office, signing it himself and not relying on auto pen. So that it's ridiculous. So those are the reasons why people lost faith in the Democrat Party. And Kamala was not a great choice. And I know there's Kamala defenders, there's Waltz defenders. I know Waltz is out there, talking about this stuff as well. So I give props to Governor Waltz for admitting that the Democrats didn't exactly give the American people a good option and they should have done better. And now we're paying the price for it. I still don't think that Waltz should be the future of the Democrat Party. And Sanders isn't the future. Nancy Pelosi isn't the future. Schumer's not the future. The future lies with Americans of my generation and younger stepping up and saying enough is enough. We're tired of the far right and the far left, because the far left has been a major problem for the Democrat Party, because the Democrat Party over the past several years has leaned very, very far left, just like the Republicans are guilty of leaning far right, when both parties should be trying to exist somewhere in the middle, the Goldilocks area, and attempting to work across the aisle with representatives of the other party, because at the end of the day, we're not supposed to be all Republican or all Democrat or conservative or liberal or moderate or libertarian. The Congress is supposed to represent the people of the United States. And unfortunately, a lot of our members of Congress are career politicians, and some of them, a lot of them, act like children at times. instead of adults, we're in a working environment. People have to work together, even if there are some disagreements and issues. You have to put that aside and work together. And both parties are guilty of this. I hate this whole my way or the highway bullshit. I'm sick and tired of it because I don't want a country that's 100% conservative or 100% liberal or even 100% moderate. I just would like to have better moderate representation, which is something I'm going to appeal to the Democrat Party in this video going forward. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that anybody at the Democrat Party is going to give two shits about what I have to say. All right, so here's what it comes down to. We don't like our money being spent on things that have nothing to do with helping the American people. What I mean by that is if the money is going somewhere else and it's not helping the American people that are suffering right now on the streets, like I talked about a moment ago, trying to get, the homeless population into shelters or get them back into some sort of like training program to get them working again, then a lot of Americans are sick and tired of this. And that's something I feel that really carried Trump over, along with the immigration issue. We'll talk about that in a moment. And we definitely need to rebuild our infrastructure. It is crumbling across the country. And yeah, we would like very much for that money that we pay taxes on to rebuild the infrastructure, the roads, sanitation, the electric grid. I mean, I'm an advocate for nuclear power. If you want clean energy, and with the advancements and safeguards that are in place now, plus technology and computers, I think that nuclear power is the way to go. But that's just my opinion, because I think eventually we are going to run out of fossil fuels. We probably will eventually run out of oil, natural gas, and solar power doesn't really give us that much at the moment. And a lot of people are very critical of wind power and how expensive windmills are and the damage it's done to birds. Like a lot of birds have been killed, unfortunately, by windmills. That's true. I know that's something that Trump says, but not everything that comes out of Trump's mouth is bullshit. That is very much true. So I'm an advocate for rebuilding the infrastructure, including a new energy grid. And defense is very important, and that's something that Americans obviously want. They want to know that we still have one of the most powerful militaries in the world and able to defend us as well as our territories. And if push comes to shove, be there with our allies. And I do care about our allies. And this is something that is very concerning to me when it comes to Trump's policies and his tariffs. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. Now, I don't know if we should continue to be the world police. I'm very anti-nation building like the neocons were doing back in the 2000s after 9/11, especially the disaster in Iraq of what happened there. But I do think that we should be on the world stage still. We are a superpower. At least I hope we will continue to be a superpower despite everything that's happening in the country. I don't like what we're doing with our neighbors, alienating these tariffs and threatening to turn neighbors into states. I think that's a bad idea. But yeah, I do believe in defense, though. National defense and securing the border. And that's the big reason why Trump won. One of the many big reasons is that the Biden administration was doing a terrible job with the border and immigration had blown up out of control. I'm all about legal immigration, and that's something we'll get to in just a minute. But no country can survive if you have a large influx of illegal immigration. You see what's happening in Europe right now, in the United Kingdom, in Ireland. And, they are suffering right now because of illegal immigration. And eventually, I think that enough of the citizens of those countries are going to get fed up. And they're probably looking at what Trump's doing, and they're not entirely against deportations and strengthening their border, like with what's happening with Poland, for example. For the past few years, the rhetoric for most Democrats and the far left have been divisive, anti-American, and has only turned the average American against them in favor of the pro-American Trump MAGA Republicans. Now, this is something I've talked about in a previous video around Independence Day a few years ago. The anti-American rhetoric was disgusting to me. How all over social media, that's all I was getting, was anti-American this, anti-American that, America bad, America Satan, America slavery, America racist, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, America has done some bad things in its history. What country hasn't? But we've also done a lot of good things. And the principles of freedom and liberty and justice for all should be for everybody, along with our founding documents, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, as well as the Declaration of Independence and the amendments that have been passed over the past few centuries. Yeah, our country is far from perfect. We've made mistakes. And, slavery is wrong. What was done to Native Americans was wrong. And not allowing women to have equality and voting rights was wrong. But these things over time have been rectified. We've done away with Jim Crow and segregation in favor of civil rights. And there was a point leading up into the 90s and the 2000s where things were getting better in this country. But both sides have been guilty of divisiveness, of bringing back racism, and I'm just sick and tired of it. I see us all as Americans. It doesn't matter to me if you're white, black, Hispanic, Asian, Native American, Indian American, whatever. As long as you are an American, you're an American, in my opinion. I know there's other countries in the world. I'm just talking about my country at the moment and the problems that we're facing and the solutions I would like to see us take going forward. So yeah, the anti-American crap has got to stop, Democrats, because obviously you pissed off Americans that were probably going to be on your side. That there's some interesting images out there, some memes, and if I find one, I'll show you, where there's somebody in the middle, like me, right, who might have leaned left or might have considered themselves to be liberal, but when the Democrats kept moving further and further left, they were literally pushing moderates out the door. Like, nope, you're a racist, you're far right now, even if most of the time you still agreed with some of the things that the Democrat Party was about. So this extremism, the council culture, it really drove a lot of people away. And that's why a lot of them, had such a radical change, especially after COVID, and became Trump supporters. Plus, you didn't exactly put up the best option versus Trump in 2024. Yes, I know, we already talked about that. The far left, far right have turned this country apart. They've torn it apart. They've stretched it to its breaking point. Both sides are guilty, in my opinion. But with action is reaction. When one side gets in power and does things the other side doesn't like, eventually the other side gets in power and they start doing things that the other side doesn't like. It's an ugly cycle. And that's something that's got to stop. We got to break the cycle. But right now, unfortunately, the cycle will continue under Trump. Democrats have all but lost control of the narrative due to the increasing volatile and violent far left. You see what's happening at Tesla dealerships. And yeah, Elon Musk has done some things that people find questionable. There's definitely things that I disagree with him on. But I also like the idea of government accountability, of having some sort of agency go in and look at the books when it comes to like what USAID is doing or what the Pentagon is doing, where our money's going, what exactly is it going towards. I like government audits. I think we need that because as a taxpayer, I want to know where my money's going. I don't have a problem paying taxes, but I don't like the fact that it's going towards a lot of things that it's really not supposed to. And unfortunately, a lot of that money has probably found its way into people's pockets, like corrupt career politicians. And that's obviously something the majority of Americans do not want, especially Americans that are struggling right now to survive, while others benefit off the millions and, billions of dollars that are raised every year in taxes, even though we're supposed to be trying to pay down this multi-trillion-dollar debt. Who knows if we ever get to pay that down, by the way. So yeah, the far left has been very violent, and I have no problem with people protesting. Whether you're far right, okay, far right, far left, they both go to their extremes. But the average conservative, the average liberal, moderate libertarian, I don't have a problem with people protesting. Freedom of speech is one of our rights, but it's the right to peacefully assemble. For example, you can peacefully assemble outside one of the Trump hotels, right? But the moment you go inside and you're not invited to go inside, then you're crossing a line. Or when you go inside the Capitol building. Now, yeah, the majority of people that went inside the Capitol building were just going in like sheep. They didn't know any better. But I still remember that day on C-SPAN. I was watching the whole like count in 2021, and yeah, I saw people breaking windows to get in. I saw doors being broken open. I saw fights breaking out and things being barricaded and items being stolen out of people's offices, like Nancy Pelosi's office. And look, I'm not a Nancy Pelosi fan, but she was Speaker of the House at the time. And how would you feel if somebody broke into your house and stole your stuff? Like, I mean, yeah, at the end of the day, that stuff is technically our stuff because we pay for it with our tax dollars, but theft is theft. And yeah, I know a lot of them are guilty of theft too. But I believe that some of the January 6th protesters like shouldn't have been pardoned. Now, maybe some of them should have been. It should have been a case-by-case basis. It should not have been a blanket pardon. So the far right is guilty of this, but the far left is also guilty. Before that, with the BLM riots, a lot of like federal state buildings were damaged. People were hurt. Some people were killed and businesses were destroyed. And the irony is a lot of black-owned businesses were also destroyed. I think there was a KFC that was razed to the ground in Atlanta, which was owned by a black family. And I still remember in one city, I don't know if it was it Chicago or Detroit? I could be wrong about the city. But it was a small business owned by an older black woman. She'd been running it for, I think, 30 years. This was her business. This was her livelihood. And the BLM riots destroyed her business. And the next day, she was out there yelling about it. And you could tell she was broken emotionally. Like, I thought you guys were doing this for me. I thought you guys cared about black people. Well, obviously you didn't care about me. Well, obviously I'm not black, but you get the point. That both sides have been guilty of going too far when it comes to the peaceful protesting. Like, on the side of the street is fine. Inside a building, not fine. In the middle of the road, not fine. Destroying Teslas, not fine. Or any other vehicle. That's somebody else's property. Like, if you want to protest, like, outside a Tesla dealership, okay, that's cool. Like, as long as it's on the government, on the public road, like, right before you actually enter the premises of the dealership, and as long as it's peaceful. You do not have a right to like damage vehicles, whether it's a Tesla, a Chevy, a Ford, whatever, or buildings. That's vandalism. Now, do I think that it's domestic terrorism to destroy Teslas? I feel like that's kind of pushing it. I guess I understand the premise, but at the end of the day, it's still a crime. It's still vandalism. You're still destroying property. And I think they should be punished accordingly, whether you're on the right or the left. Yeah, you have to get back to peacefully protesting. That's what you have to do. If you go any further than that, then you're crossing a line. But once again, whether I agree or disagree with protesters is irrelevant as long as you're exercising free speech. As long as you're not blocking traffic like the Just Oil idiots do. As long as you're not damaging paintings like Just Oil does in Europe. And as long as you're not destroying property or buildings or going inside buildings you're not allowed to go inside or destroying Teslas, I don't have a problem with you peacefully assembling to protest and to air your grievances, whether you happen to be a liberal, a conservative, moderate, or libertarian. While Republicans under Trump MAGA are taking the U.S. in an opposite direction, the isolationists, the radical one party mostly in line with Trump, is stepping out of line like Congressman Massey did the other day when it came to the government bill in order to avert a government shutdown. He was being demonized by Trump and others that are part of MAGA, even though he was getting support, to his credit, by a lot of Trump supporters and Republicans. So good job. I'm glad that it's not 100% all or nothing when it comes to the word of the God Emperor Trump. We just need more of that from people that voted for Trump and Republicans. You don't have to go along with everything that Trump says. You can actually openly voice your First Amendment right and disagree with him and support somebody like Massey whenever he does as well. And I think it was wrong of Trump to come out and demonize Massey and call for him to be primaried. I think that was a huge mistake by Trump. But of course, he's made quite a few the past, nearly 2 months he's been in office. However, I do want to make this perfectly clear because I'm not an absolutionist. Not everything that's being done by the Trump administration is bad, but some things definitely are. Like I said, I believe in a strong military and border security, and legal immigration and deporting those that are here illegally, especially the criminal element like gangs from various countries or members of the cartel, rogue agents, potential terrorists. They definitely need to be rounded up and deported. But at the same time, I think it's ridiculous to rename the Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America, especially since it's been Gulf of Mexico for centuries. I don't like the expansionists that Trump is pushing. I'm also against the rhetoric regarding Canada becoming the quote unquote 51st state. I made a video about that already, and I'm also against Greenland being annexed. I think they have a right to their own self-determination. If they wish to be independent from Denmark, that is their right. They should not be coerced into becoming a territory of the United States just because Trump wants Greenland and Canada. For the rest of the video, I'm going to talk about several policies, platforms, topics that I really feel like the Democrats need to shift to the middle on. But at the same time, I do think they need to continue to defend equality, civil rights, along with the LGBT community within reason, and offer moderate solutions. Now, I realize that there are a lot of Democrats that are going to disagree with that, but like I said, it's time for one of these political parties to start moving back to the middle. They've both been going that way, right? You know, the Republicans are definitely going further right, and the Democrats have been going further left for years. So it's time for one of the parties to start appealing to the middle, which is what I said earlier, 30 to 34% of the American population identifies as moderate. So that's a pretty large voter base to appeal to, especially with the fact that as of right now, we do not have a moderate party. If we ever do, then I hope that that becomes an actual legitimate third party, unlike all the other parties. So what do I mean by within reason when it comes to the LGBT community? So there are definitely elements of that community that are very far left that cause issues and problems and make the rest of the community look bad. And that is unfortunate. But at the same time, the majority of people that happen to be bi, are gay, or lesbian, or trans are just normal people trying to live their lives and be the person that they want to be. Now, this isn't as big of an issue with people that happen to be bisexual or lesbian or gay. I mean, we've come a long ways in that regard. I'm concerned about what is coming forward with the Trump administration for the rest of his term and perhaps even the Vance term after that. If Vance becomes the next president, I would like for them to leave the gay and bisexual communities alone and just accept that we exist. But the trans community really does concern me because, yes, there are far left elements of the trans community, just like with the rest of them, that have been very problematic. But at the same time, the majority of trans people just want to be left alone. They have gender dysphoria. They've been diagnosed with it. They've been going through like all the steps, therapy and medication. Some of them might even go through surgery, which is their choice as adults. And I do have a line in the sand I want to talk about. This is something I've mentioned in a few other videos. But yeah, there's some policy here that I think the Democrats need to rethink when it comes to the trans issue, because that's a very hot topic issue. And unfortunately, a lot of trans people find themselves in the crosshairs. And it's very unfortunate because Republicans at one time did believe in individual rights. And as an adult, you should have the individual right to be a trans person if you have gender dysphoria. If you were born biologically a male and you want to be a woman, or woman and you want to be a male, then as an adult you should have that right. But like I said, there's a line in the sand I think the Democrats should consider, because a lot of this other stuff really ticks off the majority of the American people, and it hurts the trans community as a whole. For one thing, kids should be left alone. And unfortunately, teachers in the far left have taken it upon themselves to try to indoctrinate or persuade or encourage these young minds, these young children, regarding sexuality and gender. And that crap should not be in classrooms. Kids should be learning the basic stuff like reading, writing, colors, the alphabet, all that stuff. When they get older, as like all of us have done, going from a kid to a tween to a teenager, eventually you'll sort that out on your own. The majority of the population is going to be straight. Some will be bisexual, some will be lesbians, some will be gay, and a very, very small percentage will end up being trans. But while you're a kid, that shouldn't be an issue. And I'm absolutely against any sort of puberty blockers or any of those medications being prescribed for children, especially since they're still trying to discover themselves and figure out who the hell they are. Wait till they're an adult when they can actually make that decision as a legal adult. So that should be off the table when it comes to kids. Now, obviously, there are going to be teenagers that feel like that they're trans, and it's the same thing. Go do therapy. Make sure that this is actually something you want down the road, that you would like to eventually transition, that you actually have gender dysphoria. And maybe the smallest things you can be done, like change your name or go by a name that's more suiting for you. Dress the way you want to dress. I mean, for the most part, we as Americans do have a right to dress that way, unlike other countries. But when it comes to the medication, especially surgeries, they're life-altering and life-changing. Wait till you're an adult. I'm also against trans women in women's sports. I think that trans women, for the most part, have a biological advantage over biological women in this regard. So I think that women's sports should only be for biological women. And I think there should be options in like buildings, like public schooling and businesses for gender neutral bathrooms, because I do sympathize with biological women feeling uncomfortable sharing a bathroom with trans women, even if the majority of trans women just want to go in there, use the bathroom, and get the hell out, right? They're not going in there to cause any problems or anything at all. But sadly, once again, the majority of the trans population has been targeted. But on the other side of the line, like I mentioned, with this line in the sand, is that trans women and trans men, as adults, should have that right as individuals, as long as they've gone through the proper steps, being properly diagnosed with gender dysphoria, because detrans is an issue. That is something that does happen. And I feel like the reason why that happens is because a lot of people that were initially diagnosed, or maybe never diagnosed, maybe they went on Reddit or some other social media site and they were suffering from some other mental issue, and then they were basically peer pressured into believing that they were trans, when in the end it was something else entirely. This is a serious issue. And only a very, very small percentage of the population will have gender dysphoria. And those that do should not be demonized. They should be sympathized, because that's something that nobody should have to go through, because they want to actually be a woman or they want to be a man, and it's a struggle for them. And the game ending rate for that community is very, very high. And I can only imagine how bad it is for them right now. So yeah, I do sympathize with them. I sympathize with a lot of people. So that's one reason why I don't think the trans community needs to be abandoned. But there are some things that should be rethought when it comes to the Democrat policy going forward, especially with how negatively it does affect women when it comes to women's sports, as well as children. Not everything that the Republicans have brought up should be ignored, especially when it comes to this particular topic. But unfortunately, yes, there are Republicans that are very, very anti-trans and are saying lots of awful things about trans people right now, especially on some social media platforms. Speaking of women's rights, now, obviously I'm not a woman. I don't identify as a woman. I'm a guy. But when it comes to the abortion issue, hot topic, right? But a few of these are kind of hot topics to various degrees. On one side, you have the pro-life movement that believes that abortion should be illegal and that no abortions should be allowed. But then on the other side, late-term abortions should be okay. I think the Democrats need to move to the middle on this particular topic as well. I do support early abortion, like the first trimester and the exception rule. And Trump has talked about the exception rule in the past, whether it's like rape or incest, or the mother is put into harm through the pregnancy and there's no other option but to abort the fetus, or if the fetus has been determined to be stillborn anyways and is only going to be a harm to the mother, putting her own life at risk, then these are things that obviously most people should agree on when it comes to the exceptions. But late-term abortion should be illegal, because at a certain point, the fetus does mature into a baby that could be born, that could be able to breathe on its own. And, well, they can't eat on their own, but that's because they're a baby, right? They can't exactly hobble down to the dining hall and enjoy a lunch at the buffet. But if the baby's able to breathe and function for the most part on its own, then it is officially alive, in my opinion. And that's why I think that there should be laws against late term abortion, unless there's like that exception where there's something wrong with the baby and it's putting the mother at risk, or some rare exceptions. I think the problem here is that even if the Democrats come to the table and agree that late term abortion should be illegal, you're definitely going to have those pro lifers that are not willing to give an inch or bend. And that's where the problem is. So I guess my grievance on this one is more aligned against them than with the Democrats. However, the majority of Americans are pro-choice, pro-women's rights and equality up to a certain point. And I think the majority of the American population would agree that late-term abortion should be illegal. But at the same time, there should be a window. There should be like to the first trimester, along with the exceptions that Trump has mentioned quite a few times to his credit. Countries need borders. That is a fact. That is something that a lot of Democrats have chosen to ignore, which has not helped them at all in the last election. The immigration system does need to be improved. This is a nation of immigrants, and we have people from all over the world that have come here, yearning to be free. And by the way, France, we're not giving back the Statue of Liberty because one of your crazy far-left members of parliament want to. All right? We're going to keep the Statue of Liberty. And I think the majority of the French probably don't care either way. They have their own problems. But the idea of freedom and liberty and justice and equality and the American dream should be true. And while I'm against illegal immigration, especially for those very dangerous individuals we talked about earlier, I do think that we need to rework the immigration system in order to bring people here to America that follow the rules, that follow the steps, that actually want to eventually become U.S. citizens. And I know Trump's talked about his quote-unquote gold card, but unfortunately that puts like the poor people, those suffering, at an extreme disadvantage compared to the wealthy people throughout the rest of the world that have money, that would like to be American citizens. They can do it because they can just throw some money towards the U.S. government and get the quote-unquote gold card. I think it needs to be an even playing field. For every like gold card you put out there, there should also be a green card, or maybe 2 green cards for every gold card. That way it's a fair system where it's not just about buying your way into being an American citizen. And I know that Trump is saying that he's going to have steps in place and like they're going to have to be vetted and make sure that they actually are good people that we're going to be bringing over here to, I guess, buy their citizenship. But yeah, I think that legal immigration should be for all peoples in the world that want to assimilate into the American culture. They're not coming here trying to change us or bring their own laws here like there are in other countries in Europe right now. If you want to come to America, you've got to follow our laws, our Constitution, our Bill of Rights. That's the way it has to be. You can't, both these things cannot exist. And you see what's happening in Europe right now because of Sharia law. Now, I realize there's a lot of Muslims that are not supportive of Sharia law. They want to live under the laws of these European countries and the UK, but there's a growing percentage of the population that have come to those countries in Europe and the UK that want to impose Sharia law and change these countries. And that's something I'm firmly against. If you want to change a country, then maybe you should go back to a country that has those particular laws. Because eventually it's going to come to a head. There's going to be violence and revolution, or else the population that lives in that country are just going to have to literally bow to the change. And I, for one, am completely against that. But I do support legal immigration for people across the world that actually do want to become American citizens. But it definitely needs to be improved. It needs to be reworked. It needs to be made fair, where it's not just the gold card citizens that we're bringing over. We should also make it to where people can legally come here, because don't you want to reward somebody for doing it the right way instead of trying to sneak across the border? I mean, that's kind of the point, isn't it, when it comes to immigration? So that's something the Democrats need to reconsider as well. And I know there are a lot of Democrats that have talked about that over the years, but there's also been quite a few that just want open borders, that want amnesty for everybody. We cannot have that in this country. We cannot have that in any country. No country will survive if you have the floodgates open. We need border security. And that's true for almost every single nation on the planet. So something that the Democrats need to retool when it comes to the platform of the border, of security, and immigration. Crime should not pay, but we also need accountability from law enforcement. Who watches the watchers? Citizens should also maintain the right to self-defense. Law-abiding citizens should always be protected and defended by the justice system versus criminals. Police should be respected, but are also supposed to set the example when it comes to the law, applying to everyone. No one is above the law, not even cops, politicians, or the wealthy, the celebrities. Either the law applies for all of us or it applies for none of us. I'm sick and tired of this two-tier system. It's not a race issue. It's a class system. If you have the money, then you have the ability to hire the right attorneys and get out of things that the average Joe and Jane cannot get out of. That's just a sad truth. And that's another problem that the Democrats have had when it comes to law enforcement, is that a lot of you have crapped on police. And yeah, there are some bad apples in law enforcement. That's a sad reality. The majority of men and women that wear the badge are good people. They just want to serve and protect their community. Their community is their family and their friends and their neighbors. They want to protect them from criminals. Sadly, like I said, there are bad ones. And the bad ones should be weeded out. And when they break the law, they should be punished. Like, I don't believe in this whole blue line of ignoring bad cops because they happen to be cops and they also wear the badge. Either the law applies to all of us, including police, or we don't have a society anymore. So don't crap on cops anymore. Don't shit on cops. But at the same time, the far right is also guilty of this to the other extreme. They think that no cop can do any bad, that all cops are good. That's not true. Cops need accountability. That's why we have internal affairs in a lot of departments. And yeah, internal affairs often gets crapped on by the departments, but they're supposed to serve a purpose. And maybe that should be like up to citizens and maybe not necessarily the men and women who also are law enforcement. I don't know if that needs to be reworked, but yeah, I definitely think that crime should not pay. We as citizens should have a right to defend ourselves. And in so many states, in so many cities across the country, I've heard story after story, and this happens in other nations too, where somebody's house gets broken into and the criminal basically can do whatever the hell they want. It's really bad in other nations, and it's getting worse in our country. And if the citizen, if the homeowner tries to defend themselves and hurts or kills the home invader, in some cities and states, the homeowner, the victim, gets in trouble for it. What is wrong with this picture? Why are we defending the criminals in this situation? Now, I realize that not everybody wants to be a criminal, that they make bad choices or they have bad upbringings and certain things happen that lead them to that point. But at the end of the day, they made that choice to break into people's cars and to break into people's homes. Like, I understand the situation that we're living in right now. And in that regard, I do agree with Trump that we need to rebuild the infrastructure and that we need to bring jobs back to this country, especially with what's happened with the Rust Belt and factories being shut down over the past several decades. That has led to the rise of crime. So you bring jobs back, you bring back industry. Yeah, the crime rate will go down because more people will be able to get back to work, and you'll have less people turning to crime out of desperation. But that doesn't justify them breaking into somebody else's home. Once they cross that line, once they do that, then the homeowner, the law-abiding citizen, has a right to defend themselves. They have a right to defend their property. They have a right to defend their loved ones, because a lot of times they're breaking into homes of families, of husbands and wives and children. And yeah, I have no sympathy for home invaders. If somebody tries to break into my home, I'm going to shoot them. I'm going to pull out a gun. I'm going to kill them. I'm not going to fucking hesitate because I have no idea what their intentions are. Maybe they're just trying to break in to steal some things and get the fuck out. Or maybe they have worse intentions. Maybe they're a serial killer. Maybe they're going to try and do awful things to my fiance or me and kill us. Well, no, thank you. Citizens that are law-abiding under the Second Amendment have a right to defend ourselves. Democrats need to change their policy when it comes to gun rights. Stop being so anti-gun. Law-abiding Americans should have the right to self-defense, but we can't ignore the warning signs for potential mass shooters. I do support background checks, and like every single gun I've purchased, background check. Like at the gun stores in Louisiana and Texas, I've had to do background checks, and I'm totally fine with that. But there's also learning gun safety. My grandfather taught me how to use guns. He taught me that guns are not toys. They're not for fun. I mean, yeah, you can go out to the gun range and target practice. That could be kind of fun. You can go hunting, which is important. I learned to hunt and fish at an early age, and I think those are vital things for a young American to learn. But not everybody's going to be into hunting or fishing. But the other purpose for owning a firearm is self-defense. And gun safety is extremely important. Never point it at somebody unless you intend to use it. And treat every single gun as if it's loaded, even if you're absolutely certain that the gun is unloaded. So gun safety is definitely something that I support, teaching people how to properly use a firearm. Because there's plenty of people that go out and buy a firearm that do more harm to themselves than its initial purpose, which is self-defense. So yeah, I do support gun safety. Counseling for anyone who's been red flagged by a school, parent, law enforcement, improving security at schools, along with law enforcement training. We don't want to have another Uvalde situation, which is a small town here in Texas. A few years ago, there was a mass shooting. The Uvalde Police Department didn't really do a damn thing to stop it. And they could have actually saved a lot of lives if they would have just rushed in and dealt with the shooter, but they chose not to. Now, look, being a police officer can be a thankless job. We've talked about that a moment ago. But at the same time, the majority of men and women in law enforcement know the dangers of putting on the badge. And that's what it's about, protecting and serving their community. And sometimes that's putting yourself in dangerous situations, like stopping a mass shooter, whether it's at a school or a mall or some other public place or a business. So yeah, I am an advocate for improving law enforcement training in order to properly, counter and deal with potential mass shooters. But not everyone starts off as a monster. Not everyone starts off as a mass shooter. And there are definitely plenty of people that have serious mental issues, red flags, warning signs. And some of them are on some very, very dangerous medications and even illegal drugs. That's another reason why I do support Trump in that regard, is the fentanyl crisis has killed, hundreds of thousands of people a year. And that's something that needs to be dealt with. But on the same side, I do support legal marijuana, for recreational and medicinal use for adults once again. But yeah, there's a lot of prescriptions out there that are extremely dangerous that have been subscribed to people that have caused mental issues. And, that's something worth looking at when it comes to the cause of some of the mass shooters. Not all of them. Some of them are just outright evil. But if there are warning signs, then those warning signs should be taken seriously. And these individuals probably need mental care. And perhaps even some of them need to be put away in a mental institution before they can actually harm anybody else in the process, whether it's a friend, a loved one, their own family, or even far worse, like a whole bunch of people, like fellow students or just people that they work with, coworkers, or just random people at a public place like a concert or a mall or an outlet. So I am an advocate for increasing mental institutions and centers. That's something that we should definitely address going forward, because there's a lot of people that suffer mental issues every day that are not being properly treated, and they end up harming themselves, or like I said, harming other people. And these are potential disasters that could be averted. And sadly, there's just some people that need to be put away in a mental care facility. Not everybody needs to be put in prison because some need that mental help. But yeah, they get ignored and they're just a bomb waiting to go off. And when they go off, we all blame everything else except for the fact that we could have stopped this by looking at the issues that led to that point. Responsible gun owners do not deserve to be demonized or blamed or punished for the heinous actions of mass shooters and murderers. That is something else that has turned a lot of Americans off when it comes to the rhetoric from the Democrats. Every single time we have one of these tragedies occur, and they are tragedies, and it's loss of innocent life, whether it's children or people like in various outlets that are businesses or at the mall or work that end up getting murdered by mass shooters. It is a tragedy, of course. And I have nothing but the sympathy for the lives lost and the families and the friends and loved ones affected. And like I said, I want those that are responsible to be held accountable, and I want preventative measures to cut it down. You're never going to cut it down to zero. But I do think with what I just talked about, we can reduce that number dramatically. At the same time, the mass majority of gun owners, myself included, are not mass shooters. We hope to never have to use our gun against somebody else. There was one time where I nearly had to. There was somebody trying to break into my house back in Shreveport. They were drunk. They were homeless. And, I had to pull a gun on them. And I had to yell at them to get the fuck off my property or I was going to shoot them. Fortunately, they stumbled off my property. They climbed back over the fence and disappeared into the night. And I had a right to, technically I did have a right to shoot them right there, but I didn't want to. I didn't want to take somebody's life unless I absolutely had to. And that's how the majority of gun owners feel. That's how, what they say, at least 100 million of us plus, probably even more, own legal firearms. A lot of us value life. We don't want to take life, but we also value our own life and the lives of our family and loved ones that live with us. So stop treating us like we're part of the problem because we're not. If anything, there have been plenty of positive examples in the news that get conveniently ignored by Democrats where gun owners or cops that happen to be off duty at the time saved lives. Like, especially like concealed carry citizens, they were in the right place at the right time when somebody was trying to start a mass shooting and the mass shooter gets gunned down by a law-abiding citizen or an undercover cop or a cop that happened to be off duty that happened to have a firearm with them. These things do happen. Or all the potential criminals that get gunned down, for attempted home invasion or carjacking. So a gun at the end of the day is a tool. It is neither good nor evil. It can be used by bad people. It can also be used by good people to defend good people against bad people. I am a huge advocate for self-defense. And the reality is, if you take away guns from the American citizens, even if we agreed to that, which I'll never agree to, Democrats, by the way. You want to get me against you 100%? Try and take my guns. But even if Americans one day decide, we're just going to hand over our guns. Only the citizens would do that. The criminals don't follow the law anyways. They still break the law. What's another law to them? You're not going to get them to freely hand over their firearms. All you're going to do is disarm law-abiding citizens from being able to defend themselves and their families. So yes, stop demonizing gun owners and stop being so anti-gun, please. Next, let's talk about taxes. Yes, it's our least favorite topic. We don't like paying taxes. Some states pay more, some states pay less. And Trump right now is trying to replace taxes with tariffs. And that's causing its own sort of problems for other countries in the world, especially countries that are supposed to be our allies. I don't know if that's going to end so well for us. We'll just have to wait and see. But I do believe that everyone that is a law-abiding citizen should pay their fair share of taxes, whether it's a flat tax that was introduced years ago by the Reform Party under Ross Perot. Like, I'm okay with that. Now, look, the lowest class, the poor, the lower class, those that are struggling to survive, that are barely making any money, of course, I don't think they should have to pay income tax. I mean, there's already taxes we pay for. There's gas tax, there's sales tax, and we pay plenty of different types of taxes at the local level, state level, and federal level already. So the extremely low income class and poor. I'm not talking about them. But for the middle class, the upper class, the wealthy, and especially companies, and I would even say, this is going to be a very hot topic, but I would even say like churches and synagogues and mosques and nonprofits should have to pay some percentage of tax. Maybe when it comes to nonprofits or with religious institutions, then you don't have to pay as much tax, but I don't like this whole non-tax nonsense, especially when it comes to super churches that make billions of dollars a year and their so-called pastors have like private jets and mansions and yachts and sports supercars. Yeah, I kind of think they should have to pay taxes. So I do not have a problem with corporations paying taxes, but you don't want to tax them to death, but I think that everyone could do their part, right? That's able to. Like I talked about, we all can, like when it comes to the gym, right? Like some of us can lift a certain amount of weight, and then there are others that are able to lift even more weight. But at the same time, I feel like that Americans deserve to know where our tax dollars are going. And that's something that is very interesting to me when it comes to what Doge is doing. Now, I don't think that everything Doge is doing is wrong. I like the fact that we're having accountability, that we're actually opening the books. I talked about this earlier. Maybe there should be a little bit more oversight. Maybe they have too much free reign, and maybe mistakes have been made and people that were fired shouldn't have been fired. But at the end of the day, I do believe that Americans have a right to know where their tax dollars are going, and I believe in transparency. I think that we need to have confidence that the money is not being wasted. And unfortunately, as Doge has revealed, there's a lot of things, courtesy of USAID and probably other departments and agencies, and can't wait till they get to the Pentagon. A lot of that money is probably not exactly going to places or things that the American people want our support. The rallying cry that led to rebellion and revolution and independence for the American people began with no taxation without representation. After the French-Indian War, the British were in debt, and they were taking it out on the colonies, and the American colonies were being forced to pay these taxes, these various acts like the Stamp Act, for example. At the same time, the British Empire was not allowing the American colonies to have proper representation within the British Parliament, which is why they had the rallying cry early on, no taxation without representation. Some people don't fully understand what that means, but that's what it originally was about. The majority of the Americans that made up the colonies back then did not want independence. They wanted to remain part of the British Empire. Only a small percentage eventually took up arms and fought, whether it was in militia or part of the army, under George Washington, along with the founding fathers. But the majority of the colonists did not want independence. In fact, a lot of them ended up becoming loyalists in the war. But the initial rallying cry was, once again, no taxation without representation. And that's the way it goes. We have our representation now. We have that representation in the local government, state government, and federal government. So we got the representation. So I do not have a problem paying my share of taxes. But Democrats, stop overtaxing the American people. You do this all the time in blue states and blue cities. The taxes are too damn high, as one gentleman from New York once said. I do support taxes, as long as they're within reason, as long as everyone's paying their fair share, from like middle class to the wealthy and to the corporations, and as long as we have an idea and accountability and transparency as to where our tax dollars are going and what's being funded with that money. And for the record, I don't have a problem with the safety nets, okay? That's one reason why I'm a moderate, is because I see how people suffer and have had to get on unemployment and food stamps and disability, and how that's helped a lot of Americans for the past several decades now. I do believe in safety nets, and some of that tax money, that's fine with me to go towards the safety nets, because that's helping American citizens that are suffering for whatever rhyme or reason, whether they lost their job and they're just trying to get another job, but they need money in order to survive from one point to the other, people that are disabled that simply can't work, or people that are trying to put food on the table that just need some food stamps in order to provide for themselves and their family. I am an advocate for the safety nets, combating homelessness with shelters, soup kitchens, programs to help the majority of the homeless people get back to work. And for those homeless people that are suffering serious mental issues, they deserve mental care. They should be put in a mental facility. And I used to work downtown in Shreveport when I was younger for my grandfather's business. And I came across quite a few homeless people, and they'd all ask for like $1, so I always had a few extra dollars on me. The first time it happened, I thought I was being held up, but it was just simply somebody saying, "Hey, can I have $1?" I'm like, "What?" I didn't expect it, but you get used to it after a while. So I had a few dollars in my pocket just to make sure in case I did run across a homeless person. So I just give them $1 and be nice to them and move about my day. But there were times I came across some pretty scary individuals. And I do remember one veteran who was homeless who was yelling at a wall. He was having an argument with a wall of a building I was walking by. This poor person should have been in a mental care facility. They shouldn't have been left on the street. So yeah, there's some people I think we can rehabilitate and get back in the working force. And there's some that just simply need mental care, which is why I'm an advocate for more mental care institutions. But along with that, I am an advocate for Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, welfare, food stamps, disability, like I talked about. I do believe that some people exploit it, take advantage of it, abuse it, but the majority of Americans are actually in desperate need of these benefits and safety nets, and I'm a huge advocate for it. I think it's better to spend that kind of money on helping American citizens instead of people across the world and nations that have their own problems, that need to come up with their own solutions, especially in countries that absolutely hate our guts. And we definitely need to give better treatment towards our veterans, absolutely. A lot of them do suffer PTSD. A lot of them are given false promises when they serve, and whenever they get out of service, they're treated like crap. So yeah, the VA needs to be improved, and they need to be treated well because they did serve our country. The least we can do is support them after they've taken off their uniform. Voter ID. So this is a no-brainer to me, and I don't know why it's a no-brainer. The majority of Americans require an ID for all sorts of things. I will put up a list of things that we are required to have an ID for. Voting is one of the most important things we can do in a democratic republic. Any democracy, any republic where the people have a right to vote on their representation at the local level, state level, federal level, you should have to show ID. And I've had to show ID for years. It's not a big deal to me. I have a driver's license. The majority of Americans either have a driver's license or they have some sort of legal ID that they can get a hold of. And the fact that these elections are once every 2 years and you need an ID anyways for a lot of things, it's a no-brainer. We should have to show our ID because in a lot of these states and cities where they don't allow ID, it really does make you wonder why Democrats have been against voter ID. They make all sorts of silly, bogus, false claims, which are ridiculous and insane, and they're insulting to various communities when the majority of communities across America, whether you're black, white, Hispanic, Asian, American, have ID. It's a no-brainer. And yes, majority of Americans know where the DMV is. They know how to use the internet, Democrats, and a lot of us have to get ID. So, yeah, you need to change policy when it comes to your stance regarding voter ID. And that's another issue. Democrats, you need to stop accusing Republicans of being racist for this reason, that reason, because it's the boy who cries wolf. You cry wolf too many times, people stop believing you. And the same thing goes for voter ID, because the majority of us already have an ID. And all of us that go vote have to show our ID. They don't make exceptions. They don't look at me and say, "Oh, you're white. You don't have to show ID. It's fine." No, I have to show my ID too. And you know what? I don't have a problem with that. And I think the majority of the American people don't have a problem with that either. This is not like Jim Crow. This is not segregation. This is not some sort of ridiculous tax on African Americans when it comes to their right to vote. We all have the right to vote, but at the same time, we have to have checks and balances in that system, and in order to make sure that our votes don't get taken away from us. And I've heard this horror story time and time again, where people show up in some of these cities to vote, and to their horror, they find out that they already voted, even though they clearly didn't vote. That is a big reason why I'm an advocate for all of us to have voter ID. And it's something that the Democrats seriously need to do a 180 on. But at the same time, like I talked about earlier, yes, I like the fact that the Democrats are champions, or supposed to be champions, of civil rights, equality, justice for all. You can do that and talk about inclusion without demonizing white Americans for sins of the past. I was not a slave owner. My dad was not a slave owner. My grandparents were not slave owners. No American living today is a slave owner because slavery is illegal. We fought the Civil War over slavery, and we passed amendments abolishing slavery. It's illegal. It's immoral. It's wrong. The majority of white people feel that way. The majority of white Americans are also not racist. I can't speak for the rest of the world because sadly, slavery does exist in other parts of the world, but it's not a thing in America anymore. Isn't it about bringing people together from all walks of life? Doesn't matter what your pigment is, doesn't matter what your orientation happens to be. And for the record, I know there are some white people out there that are racist, unfortunately. There are people in every single group that are racist, that are supremacists, that hate everyone else that doesn't happen to look like them. It's ugly. It's disgusting. It has no place in the 21st century. And I hope that eventually we can get past these petty differences and humanity ends up like it is in Star Trek. That's one reason why I like Star Trek. I like other sci-fi too, like Star Wars, but specifically with Star Trek here, we're all human beings at the end of the day. That's what I'm trying to say. And that's the way I've always seen us. Yeah, we have differences. Duh. Obviously, but we also have a lot of things in common. And I think that's something the Democrats should actually consider, bringing people together, not excluding people, not demonizing people based on crap that happened in the past that we have no control of. I can't go back in time and stop slavery. I can't stop all these awful things that happened throughout American history, but we can learn from it. We can do better. We can be better. We can aspire to be the nation, the beacon on the hill that is about freedom, liberty, equality, and justice for all Americans. Now, before I wrap up this video, Democrats, I have just one more thing. If the Democrats somehow find themselves back in power by 2026, by 2028, by 2030, and you actually followed some of these suggestions that I had, if you start moving towards the middle and becoming a little bit more moderate, or at least catering towards the moderates, and recognize that not everything that the Trump supporters voted for is bad and anti-American, that there's actually some good stuff there, kind of like pick the good stuff and, separate the good from the bad and go with the good, then I think that you will be a better party for it. But revenge is a fool's game, just like Arthur Morgan once said in Red Dead Redemption 2. Now, what do I mean by that? You have both parties guilty of wanting revenge on each other. You had the Democrats wanting revenge on Trump after, 2020. And now you see Trump wanting revenge on the Democrats for everything that happened, since. We have to get past the revenge. It's an ugly cycle that needs to be broken. Democrats, if you find yourself back in power, you can't go down this road because it's just going to keep going and going and going. The goal is to end the divisiveness, to heal the wounds, or at least try to, and bring people back together, at least enough of the people for you to get a majority as well as a mandate once again. And you have to be sincere about this. You have to look hard at yourself and say, look, this stuff that we did in the past didn't work. We were wrong. We made mistakes. You have to be willing to grow from the mistakes, learn from them. And like I said, understand that not everything that Trump is doing is bad. A lot of it is, unfortunately. But there is some good things too. And there's things that Americans actually cared about that I cited in this video. You have to understand why the American people chose Trump over Kamala Harris. And you have to give the American people better options going forward. In local elections, state elections, federal elections, and in 2028, whoever ends up being the Democrat presidential candidate has to be somebody that can unite the American people back together. Somebody that is not a far left candidate, somebody that is, like I said, more of a moderate in the middle, that can bring people together, that can be about the healing, the divide, the forgiveness, breaking the cycle, and trying to move the nation forward into the 2030s. Keep what's worked, improve what needs to be improved, fix what was broken, But revenge will only lead to more revenge. That will just lead to more divisiveness. We don't need that. Now, at the end of the day, when the dust settles, might there be some that need to be held accountable more than others? Maybe. I don't know how bad this is going to get. I hope not. I really hope things work out. I'm concerned, especially with the tariffs and making ourselves isolationists and the theocracy. I'm completely against theocracy. I believe in the First Amendment, like I said, the right to freedom of speech, the right to freedom of religion, as long as you're not forcing somebody else to believe what you believe. I'm against church and state. I think it should be separated, right? But at the same time, don't punish everybody that voted for Trump. Don't punish everybody that's part of MAGA, because right now, yeah, they're having a honeymoon phase with Trump. And at the moment, maybe in their eyes, Trump can do no wrong. But there are a few people that are starting to disagree with some of the things that Trump is doing. Myself included. Bear in mind, I did vote for Trump. I own that. I have my reasons for it. As I've stated before, my grandfather was a Trump supporter. He passed away a year before the election, and I voted for Trump on behalf of my grandfather, who could not cast his vote. My grandfather was my hero. He was my mentor. I looked up to him. He served this country in World War II. He went from rags to riches. He lived the American dream, and he meant a great deal to me. And I didn't always agree with my grandfather, but I loved and I respected my grandfather. And so, yeah, I voted for Trump on behalf of my grandfather. And because the Democrats did not give us a good option in Kamala Harris. And I hope that Kamala does not run for governor in California. I think she'd be a terrible choice for California as governor. I don't think she should run for president again. She was not a good vice president, and the American people clearly didn't want her as president. It has nothing to do with her being a woman. It has nothing to do with the pigment of her skin. She was just a bad choice. Hopefully, the Democrats can regroup and take the criticism seriously, have a quote-unquote come to Jesus moment, even if you're not religious, you know what that means, and re-examine your platform and see how far left you've gone and why a lot of Americans have abandoned you, have turned away from you in favor of Trump and the Republicans. That's not going to last. Trump is going to continue doing things that tick off more Americans that voted for him. The honeymoon phase will come to an end, even though his approval ratings are up and the Democrats' ratings are low. And another thing is, I would say the gerontocracy of both parties have to go. Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, and on the Republicans too. They need to be voted out of office. They all need to retire. It's time for some new blood to get into Congress. I don't know if we're ever going to get congressional term limits. I support congressional term limits. That's a different topic entirely. But yeah, it's time for, I guess you could say, my generation and generations that are coming up behind me to take the reins and move the country forward. So I sincerely hope that somebody at the Democrat Party watches this video, and thank you to all of you that did watch the video. Even if you disagree with me, you're welcome to disagree with me. And that's another thing, Democrats. Anytime somebody disagrees with you, stop calling them an Islamophobe. Stop calling them the worst names in the book. People have a right to disagree. And you'll be surprised how many times people might actually agree with you if you're actually civil to each other and start treating each other like human beings again. And we're guilty of that on social media, because you see a photo or an image or like a random name on social media, and you forget that that's just another person. And unfortunately, that happens on both sides. So we have to get back to civility. We got to get back to the middle. At the moment, I don't feel like the Republicans are going to do that. I think they're going to take us in the direction they're currently taking us, for better or worse, under Trump. You hope it works out. Like I said, I do have my concerns. But even though I'm not the biggest fan of the two-party system that we have, and a lot of times it does feel like they're just voting on the lesser evil, and they're both pretty bad. And there's a lot of corruption in both parties and career politicians that need to be voted out. But I'd rather have two parties than one party. And if I can't have a moderate party, then at the very least, I would like to have that other option start to cater more to the 34% moderates in America, like myself and others, and libertarians and other Americans that may eventually decide to vote for something other than Republican in 2026 and 2028 and 2030 that would like to have a legitimate option. As of right now, that 29% approval rating is not a good sign for the Democrats, and you need to make some serious changes going forward. If you consider making those changes, who knows? Maybe by 2026, I might even vote for some of your candidates. Maybe not all of your candidates, because I do believe in voting for people over parties. I like to go down the line, and I even voted for some Democrats. I didn't vote all Republicans. I voted for, I think, at least one Libertarian, because I do still have some Libertarian leaning. But once again, I do apologize for the length of this video, but I felt like it was important for me to get this video out there. And whoever watched it, thanks for watching. And Democrats, I hope that you take all these suggestions that myself and many others are trying to give you seriously, and you make the necessary changes. Because if you keep going far left, you're not going to gain any people. You're just going to keep losing people. And maybe eventually a new party will rise. And I hope that new party ends up being a moderate party. And if that happens, then hell yeah, I'm all aboard. And you know what, Democrats, if you go more moderate on things like I suggested, then who knows, maybe for the first time in my life, I might even become a Democrat. As of right now, I'm just an independent. I was raised to be a Republican by my grandfather. I eventually became Libertarian. I was a Ron Paul Republican. But at this moment, I feel like as a moderate, I don't have a home. It would be nice if the Democrats offered me and other moderates a home. If not, then I guess we'll just have to go start our own party